humans. Today I wanted to talk about this guy right here, which I picked up on a recent trip to my local hunting supply store. This is the Buck Haxby. Blah 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 blah, knife laws, contains nickel, which Proposition 65 warning. I've said my piece about Proposition 65. I hate Proposition 65. I don't think it does anything. This is one of the better ones. It does mention which particular element is going to potentially kill me, but I'm still not a fan of Proposition 65. So let's pop this open. Cardboard box. Oh, and my dog poo bag. And I didn't get a warranty card. Cool. So this is the Buck Haxby, or the 259. Oh, that's nice. Oh, that is nice. Okay, now I'm just playing with it. So, this is a fairly large knife in the Buck collection. It is a Chinese-made Buck. But, so it's got full-length steel liners. On top of that, there's this carbon fiber. It's that cheap, sort of slippery feeling carbon fiber, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially not in this price range. I think it looks... Here's the thing. It looks neat until you think about it. If you just see this in passing, it's just a cool looking thing, right? Slight holographic effect, depending on how the light catches it, which I think is pretty cool. As soon as I start thinking about it, though, it does end up looking cheap, which I do find to be a little bit unfortunate. The other cool thing it has is this sort of bomb nose pivot with this orange pivot ring around it, which I personally think is pretty good looking. You see the orange pivot ring on the backside as well. That snaps nicely. You've got a lanyard hole at the back, which I like. I don't necessarily use lanyards, especially if they has a pocket clip, but I do like having the option. Oh my god, this pocket clip. Hold up. I'm not feeling the pocket clip at all. And I think a part of that is just like, this is a fairly large handle. I wear a size large glove at work. I'm not like a super, super huge handed guy, but this is, it fits really nicely in a couple of different grips that I don't always get to do on knives. Oh, the action is quite nice. This pocket clip looks weird. It's definitely not a deep carry clip, which for me personally on work knives, I actually prefer. I have a hard time with deep carry clips when I'm wearing gloves or something along those lines, because it can be difficult to sort of get into my pocket and detail around. Having a little bit of the knife sticking out makes it a lot easier just to grab and pull for me personally. So I don't necessarily mind, and it's not like it's a shallow carry clip either. There's a little bit of the knife sticking out, which to me is not the end of the world. I think that it benefits a work knife to have just a little bit sticking out at the end of the day. Oh, the action on this is actually really nice. Like, this is incredibly smooth, especially for what I would consider to be a budget knife, right? To me personally, anything under about 100 Canadian bucks, I consider to be a budget knife. And you don't often find anything feeling quite that smooth at that price range, unless you're talking something along the lines of like a Civivi with a button lock especially. You'll find button locks that are that smooth, but I don't often find liner locks or frame locks that are feeling quite this smooth. And a good part of it is, this isn't a small blade, it's a fairly heavy chunk of steel that is falling, which is absolutely helping. You have this sort of drop point, is that a hollow? Yeah. Hollow grind. Very, very traditional knife lines. This is nothing new. Everything under the sun looks like this. I think it looks pretty classy with the belt, with that satin finish to it, which is picking up my fingerprints to an annoying degree. Buck branding on the blade, which I don't necessarily mind. I like having the model number also on the blade. I believe I already mentioned it, but this is the 259. I do wish we had the blade steel somewhere on the blade. The spine is actually slightly... It's not like it's crowned or rounded or anything like that, but the edges have been knocked down a little bit, which which makes this a very, very nice, like this is a comfortable knife just to sort of manipulate. Like as far as fidget factor goes, I'm never going to get bored of this. The liner lock is slightly raised and has a little bit of jimping to it, which makes it super easy to get traction on. And it flips just so, like, this is one of the nicer flipping actions that I have felt personally, especially on a budget knife. Like, don't get me wrong, I have other knives that flip like this, right? Like the Wee Banter is super, super fun because it just sort of rockets out. As soon as you get that just enough pressure to break it, it rockets out, right? Something along the lines of the Spydercos of the world, which they're super fun to flick, right? But I don't feel like very many budget knives especially get a flick right. And I don't think I've experienced too many non-budget knives that actually have a flick. Most of them are thumb studs. So, oh, that's nice. You've got to be riding on bearings. Yeah, it's absolutely riding on bearings. You can see them just a little bit in there. You've got a hollow flipper tab with no jimping on it, which sometimes feels a little bit slick, but possibly because it's very, very close to 90 degrees that's coming off on the spine. Like it's not rounded off like you see on the Chevalier there or anything along those lines. So because even though it's not jimped, you're getting a really, really easy spot to put your finger and just pull straight down. You can also just push on it. And, oh man, this blade, it's rocketing. Like this is actually really, really comfortable to play with. As far as its factory edge is concerned, this feels like it's going to slice really, really well. It's not a super tall blade, but the hollow grind has a lot of space to travel. It's like an inch of hollow grind, and it's not a very, very thick blade either, which makes me think that this is probably going to slice quite nicely. Yeah. No, doesn't quite want to do it that way. That was definitely user error. Yeah, I can get a little bit of a wave going, but not tons of a wave. And just straight up, how's the edge all the way out? Yeah, that is pretty damn nice. And just at an angle, does it just want to bite? Yes. Yes. Oh, that's nice. All right. Factory edge is very typical buck. It's not a razor blade. It's not going to pick up absolutely everything every time, but it is fairly sharp, and it being a hollow grind, it slices nicely without rolling, which is quite nice to have. My only other real initial impression of this knife, other than the pocket clip, is ugly. Ugly. Like, it's comfortable. I'm not feeling it in any hand positions. A little bit if I like choke down to where my finger's directly on it, but I don't think there's any natural hand positions where I'm going to really be feeling it. So in that respect, it's fine. It just looks like crap, which is a little disappointing. I don't think this is like a super sexy looking knife, but it looks like a nice tool. Not like an ultra premium tool, but it just looks like a nice tool, you know? Something a little bit above what your employer buys you, but not quite what you get yourself on your birthday. That's how I would describe this knife, which for me is exactly what I want it to be. It's a little heavy. It has that sort of like added weight means added premium feel to it, which again, very reminiscent of sort of a one step up tool, right? Not a premium tool, but a nicer tool. I'm going to play with this guy for a couple more days. I'm going to give my impressions, which you are about to see in just a second. But right out the box, I am liking this. We're back. So I've been playing with this guy about a week now, carrying it every day throughout that week. And I have some more fully formed opinions. So throughout that time, it did a couple of jobs for me. The most obvious one, you know, sharpening pencils, stuff like that. There's not too much evidence of that, but since then I've been doing some other stuff as well, so it must have rubbed off. But yeah, sharpening pencils for class, very, very common thing. Every time I have a test, I have to sharpen my pencil. I usually use a knife to do it because I don't carry a pencil sharpener. Not a huge deal. It handles that stuff beautifully. Opening feed bags for the animals, it handles that absolutely beautifully. Doing other small to medium weight tasks, it's been handling beautifully. Opening up packages, no problem whatsoever. Drinks boxes, what have you, it's been handling all that great. My issue has come where I've been starting to do some more hard work with it. I did some feather sticking with it up against some wood. I did some long stroke cardboard cutting, which it actually handled really well. Breaking down cardboard, stuff like that, it handled really well. Cutting ribbons, cords, fibers, stuff, it did okay at. It wasn't amazing, but I think that's because the edge is actually a little bit refined for that. You want a toothier edge if you're cutting through lots of fibrous material. And this, I mean, love it or hate it, Buck does a pretty solid edge. It's been a little chewed up now, but it did a pretty good job of that. Like I said, my issue with this guy mostly came when I was trying to do any type of feather sticking or cutting into wood or long cuts through wood especially. Not because it's uncomfortable or anything like that. It's actually quite comfortable. But when you're doing longer pushes, I don't know, some combination of this whole thing just wants, instead of like remaining at an even level, it always wants to be digging either in or out. Very likely user error, I'm not going to deny that, but I've had many knives that I've done wood cutting with, and this is a problem not unique to this particular knife, but I've noticed it a lot more with the 259. Other thing that I've really noticed with it is I don't really know where this thing belongs. So what do I mean by that? Well, size-wise, it feels like a work knife. It is long enough to be a work knife. The pocket clip is very, very correct to be a work knife. Flipper deployment, easy to work with gloves. You know, it's got, well, I'll finish up with the stuff that does well for a work knife, right? Like, it's a fairly robust feeling knife. I had no issue with increased or decreased lockup. It felt good cutting, giving it some harder tasks to do. It felt like a good knife to use. The edge is okay. The steel is 8CR, which I don't love to see on a knife at around $70, but I'm not super mad about either. Like, it's very blah. It's nothing, it's not noteworthy in any particular way, up or down. So there's that, right? Keep in mind that's Canadian dollars. So that part's all fine. It did take a little bit of chipping to the edge, especially when I was cutting through the wood. Not chipping, just dulling. You can see a little bit of glinting there on the edge. It's not bad, and it's just in that one little spot right there where I was doing most of the work in order to see how well it would hold its edge. So keep in mind I was actively testing to see if this would happen. And I imagine a quick hit with a strop and this thing will be right back to where it belongs, right? Perfectly fine, perfectly happy. No real complaints with it as far as a work knife goes, except, well, there are some real complaints. The first one is the liner lock. It's slightly raised and it does have some jimps, which makes it nice and easy to open. But with gloves on, I actually had a hard time closing this knife. I had a very, very easy time opening this knife, even with gloves on, and working with this knife, even with gloves on, because it is, you know, nicely long enough for me to be able to grab it with gloves on. But I had a hard time getting to this relief with my gloves on. Not the end of the world, perfectly fine, whatever. That's my major complaint with it. My more minor complaint is that carbon fiber in a workplace just feels a little weird. There's no real reason behind that, and like, again, this is a relatively inexpensive version of carbon fiber, but carbon fiber feels a lot like overkill for a workplace. Not the end of the world, just something I noticed. I really do like how the outside edge is, the outside edge is all chamfered. It makes this knife really, really comfortable to hold. And the same thing with that like little bit of knocking down on the edges on the back of the knife made it really, really comfortable to push through cardboard, push through longer cuts. So that part there, really, really nice. Like I mentioned, the pocket clip is in the position that I do like for working. There's enough sticking out that I can grab it very easily, even with gloves on. My issue actually came with how sharp and upswept this beak is right here. I have to wear a welding shirt for welding, right? Something that'll just keep me from basically setting myself on fire. FR rated shirt, not the end of the world. But the hem of it kept actually catching. Every time I'd raise my arms above my head, it would pull the knife a little bit out of my pocket, which got a little bit annoying throughout the day. I imagine this wouldn't be a huge issue, especially if you're tucking in your shirts or if you're wearing a longer shirt that goes far enough over your waist that it doesn't interfere with it. But in my particular case, I actually did notice it getting caught a couple times, which a little bit annoying, but not the end of the world. The very, very end of the spine up here isn't knocked down. There's nothing really to say about that. It's just interesting to me. Yeah, I mean, Buck always does a good job with their heat treats. For 8CR, I feel like this is the best 8CR I've seen in a long time. It's comfortable to use over time. I haven't stropped it yet. I don't know how well it's going to retake its edge, but 8CR, I've never had an issue sharpening before, and I doubt I'll have an issue sharpening now. On their website, they call it a full flat grind, and I think it might be a full flat grind in the way that Mork nibs are a full flat grind, where they call it a full flat grind, but the way that they make their flat grind is by taking two massive wheels, so it's technically ever so slightly hollow. And the way that I'm going to choose to test this is by taking the straight edge of a pencil and showing you guys where... Oh, it's actually a lot harder to show than I thought it would be. I also just straight up could be wrong. It's just the feeling that I got from using this guy. Is there like a good way for me to put a light under this? I don't think that there is. Yay. Yeah. They're calling it a full flat grind. I don't 100% buy that it is a proper full flat grind. Just the impression that I got from using it. I could be wrong. Looking at it, I actually might be wrong. This side here with the light makes it a little bit easier to see. A little bit. It feels very, very slightly hollow. It feels very, very slightly hollow. I don't know if that's just what I'm expecting from Buck. I don't know if that's in my mind playing tricks on me, but that is the truth of what I feel, so that is the truth of what I'm going to express. Overall, I should do a hardware check before I get into my final thoughts. So the pivot proceeds to drop bits. It says the T8. So the pivot is a T8. You can see T8. And the body screws are not T8, neither are the pocket clip screws. Here's my T6. Yeah. So the pocket clip screws and the body screws are both going to be a T6 screw. Not the end of the world. I like seeing T8s on everything, but hey, what do you want? What do I actually think of this thing? I don't know where this is supposed to fit. And what I mean by that is the overall sort of design, all of the design elements scream to me work knife, right? You have easy deployment option with gloves on, right? You just push down on that and it flies open. I had a difficult time opening the liner lock with gloves on, but under most circumstances, and even if I was just wearing lighter gloves, keep in mind, right? My work means that I'm wearing welding gloves, which are relatively thick gloves. If I'm wearing other types of work gloves, I think I'd have a very easy time getting to this because I was capable of getting to it. I just had a hard time, right? So even the liner lock, there's enough cutout there, there's enough jimping there that I feel I could get to it with gloves on, just not my gloves in particular. The pocket clip and pocket clip position absolutely scream to me working knife, work knife, work knife, work knife. But then you get into the carbon fiber. And generally speaking, carbon fiber says showier. It says gentlemanly. It says office carry. It says I'm nice and I'm pretty and you should treat me kindly, which ain't work. So it didn't chip. It didn't do any damaging. It worked perfectly fine, but that feels a little bit off. And the other thing that feels a little bit off is the ball bearings. So it does run on bearings, you know, nothing inherently wrong with that. It makes a very, very smooth, good feeling flip. It's super fun to play with. I have an hour's commute to and from school every day, which means that I spend an hour in my truck basically just doing this and fiddling with the radio, but you know, that's neither here nor there. And it's fun to play with. It's fun to flip. It is fun to do all the things that you want to have fun doing, but it doesn't feel
tough enough for work. For work, you want washers, you want impossible to get metal shavings, impossible to get dust, impossible to get sawdust in there. Like, there's tons of stuff that through an average work day you get in and on your person. And I always worry, and I've had a very, very difficult time in the past with getting stuff into bearings, and more importantly, getting stuff out of bearings once they're in. So for those two reasons, it doesn't quite feel like a proper work knife to me. Like, it's not going to end up replacing any of the knives that I have specifically for work. And therefore this sits in sort of this weird middle ground where it's not a work knife, but it's too big and a little bit too brutish and a little bit too present to be a show knife. Right? And I like it. I think it's a good knife. I just don't think it fits anywhere special. And because you're dealing with fairly mediocre materials for the price, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with this type of carbon fiber. There's nothing wrong with 8CR, really, other than the price that it's coming at. And at 70-ish bucks, it's feeling a little steep. I would much rather pay $75 proper and get, an upgraded blade steel. Even something only slightly upgraded, like a D2, a properly heat-treated D2, right? Which, yeah, I'd have to maintain, I'd have to keep from rusting, but I'd be happier with, if that makes sense. We're going to do some size comparisons, and then we're going to head out. I think that kind of formulates my thoughts. Here it is next to the Civivi Chevalier, which obviously I have not taken an eraser to recently. Whoops. And the Wee Banter, as you can see, it is quite a bit bigger than both. The Wee Banter is what I consider to be the bottom end of a normal size knife. Anything bigger than the Wee Banter, I consider to be medium at the very least. And the Civivi Chevalier is just a fun size comparison because this is one of the most perfectly average sized knives that I have. So this is what I would consider to be a perfectly average sized knife. Ooh, it needs a clean. This is what I mean by work knives getting crap in there. It'll work itself out. I'll give it some 10 weight or something. Anyways, up next we have the Buck 110. As you can see, it is ever so slightly longer than the Buck 110. The Buck spec sheet on this says a 3 7/8 inch blade. So, ever so slightly bigger than the Buck 110's, I believe 3 3/4, which puts this knife very, very slightly into what I consider to be the large knife category. Anything bigger than a Buck 110, I consider to be a large knife, and it definitely feels that way. It's got a lot of handle. Here it is next to the Zippo. It is obviously bigger than a Zippo, but everybody knows how big a Zippo is. And then, in terms of its thickness, quite a bit thinner than the Buck 110, as you can see. And very, very comparable thickness to the Zippo. At its thickest point right here in the pivot, it is ever so slightly thicker than the Zippo, but really not by much, which means it does fit fairly well in the pocket. Yeah, this just kind of fits in a weird space for me. I like it. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to give it a new edge, seeing as how the edge is, it's not brutal, but it is a little chewed up, so I'll probably just drop it back into shape. Yeah, it's not a bad knife. It's just difficult to recommend because it doesn't do any one thing well. It does everything okay. So, I don't know. It's fine. Buck does a good job with their heat treat. If it speaks to you, I can recommend it. If it doesn't speak to you, I'd pass. Stay safe. Have fun out there. Peace.